I will never forget the story of how I got into Megami Tensei. It was during the summer of 2012 when I was at the peak of my weeboo phase in high school. One day I was browsing the PlayStation Store on my PS3 when I saw an advertisement come up for the recently added title called Persona 3 FES. Now, the only time I had heard of Persona prior to this was the year before when I watched two best friends play Persona 4 on Machinima.
Yeah, it's Battlefield!
Battlefield 3!
Battlefield 3 out this week!
Modern War Battles 5!
I can't wait to play the multiplayer!
At the time, I thought it looked cool, but it was only on PS2, and the PS3 I had wasn't backwards compatible, so I kinda just forgot about it and went back to playing Call of Duty Black Ops. From what I remembered, it was a series that combined two of my favorite things at the time, JRPGs and Japanese visual novels. So I immediately bought it, I played it, and I was more than hooked. Not only for its story, art style, and dating sim elements, but also for the way it drew inspiration from mythologies throughout history. There were so many monsters to collect and battle with, all of which were based on ancient mythological gods and demons. Persona 3 was just as much of a history lesson as it was a video game. Shortly after that, I discovered the MegaTen Wiki, through which I found out that Persona was only a small part of a much longer-running franchise called Megami Tensei. In addition to the Persona series, there was the mainline series, the Digital Devil Saga series, the Devil Summoner series, and many more, which all sounded really interesting, but unfortunately most of these were on the PS2, which I still didn't have at the time, so I couldn't play most of them. But there was one that caught my attention. An entry for the Nintendo DS called Devil Survivor. Megami Ibanroku Devil Survivor, also known as Shin Megami Tensei Devil Survivor in English, is a turn-based strategy RPG that was released for the Nintendo DS in 2009, and then an updated version, Devil Survivor Overclocked, was released in 2011 for the Nintendo 3DS, which added better visuals, new story content, and voice acting. Once I heard about it, I checked to see if I could buy a copy anywhere nearby, and conveniently enough, a GameStop within walking distance from my house happened to have it. So I went over there, I bought it, and once I got home and started playing, yet again, I was hooked. In fact, I was so hooked that I actually went out of my way to finish it before I finished Persona 3. That's right, this was my first MegaTen game, but this was the first one that I completed. Devil Survivor was not only the game that cemented me into Megami Tensei as a die-hard fan, but it really showed me just how a video game can be so immersive, so relatable, and so much fun at the same time. With Shin Megami Tensei 5 and Nocturne Remastered being scheduled to release soon, the franchise is bringing in more fans than ever, and while I'm seeing a lot of people talk about their favorite games, usually those being Nocturne or 4, I don't actually see people talk about Devil Survivor that much. Devil Survivor will always hold a special place in my heart, and I made this video because I want to express to you all just what makes this game such a masterpiece, and why, in my opinion, it's the best MegaTen game. Development of Devil Survivor began shortly after Atlus had acquired Careersoft, who were previously known for the Landgrisser and Growlancer series. With this going to be Careersoft's first MegaTen game, they were pretty much on their own for the development of this game, because most of Atlus's veteran developers were busy with other projects like Strange Journey and Catherine. Needless to say, these new developers had extremely high expectations to live up to. Now, these people easily could have just taken the gameplay of Mainline, slapped a new setting or something on it, and then called it a day. But they instead decided to do something unique. They decided to make it a strategy RPG, which is something the franchise hadn't attempted since Rond on the Sega Saturn. This seemed like kind of an odd decision at the time, but these developers had the perfect idea of how to bring MegaTen back into the strategy RPG genre. Good map design? Check. Mission variety? Check. Loads of customization? Check, check, and check. It plays like what you'd expect from an SRPG, where your characters move around the map, engage in combat, etc., etc. However, each combatant is actually a team of 3 members, the one in the middle, who functions as the leader and controls the movement on the map, and 2 allies on the left and right side. For you, this means you have your human party member, who is always the leader, and your demons on the side. When you engage enemies on the map, it goes into this combat system that's kind of like a miniaturized version of the press turn combat seen in mainline. You're rewarded for exploiting the enemy's weaknesses and landing critical hits, and doing so may give you an extra turn, but your party members can only get one per skirmish. There are also other ways to get extra turns as well, like having an enemy hit your own resistance, and you might actually start the battle with one depending on your agility stat and who has the initiative in combat. However, you can also just as easily lose them, so be careful. Now, getting back to my point about the customization, with all the different demons, skills, and strategies you can take, there is a lot of thinking involved with this game. It is one of the most in-depth and customizable strategy RPGs I've ever played, and it's some of the most fun you can have with the genre. For one thing, you can fully customize your protagonist's stats and every character's skill set. You have a total of 7 skill slots for each character, 3 for command skills, 3 for passive skills, and 1 auto skill, which are exclusive to humans and always activate at the beginning of battle. The same is true with your demons, but instead of auto skills, they have what are called race skills. These are skills that every demon of a certain race always has, and they can actually make or break a team. Want to be able to hit the enemies from further away while sacrificing your extra turns? Use a dragon or a vial. Want to be able to move through obstacles on the map? Try putting a Genma or an Avion in your party. Want to be able to move around the map really fast? Try using a Wilder. You can also combine these with your own skills and other race skills to make for some effective and even debatably overpowered combinations. For example, if you run a Kishin with a beast, you can attack, move to another enemy, attack again, and then move away again. Or if you run a deity while having Blitzkrieg as your auto skill, your party will have an almost double increase in magic damage, and if you combine it with both the elemental boosters, that increase will go up to more than triple. But it's not all easy. You can't just pass the best skills onto every character. For human characters, skills have stat requirements, so don't think you can just go dumping all of your stats into magic, teach them the best offensive skills, and then steamroll your way through the game. You have to meet the minimum requirements before you can set the skills onto your character. And for demons, you can't get rid of their innate skills when fusing them. Other than that, there's really not much to say. It's got pretty much everything you would expect from a MegaTen game, like the monsters, the moves, the fusion, and even though it is different in many ways, most of the iconic elements from MegaTen are still here in some way or another, and it's all done very intuitively. I mean, heck, it even borrows some elements from Persona, like time management. Yeah, you only have a limited amount of time to do stuff. You use your free time to do things like getting to know characters better and learning about the lore of the game, which can also open up side quests. But I put free in quotes because if you make poor use of your time, it could lead to the death of a character or getting locked out of one of the endings that you want. You know, despite being basically a visual novel outside of combat, there really is a lot going on and a lot to do. Characters have different interactions depending on your previous choices, and every time I go back to this game, I always find myself learning something that I didn't know before. It really makes this world feel alive, even if you can't actually explore it for yourself. But with Devil Survivor, Careersoft not only proved that they were capable of making a MegaTen game that was on par with the others, they proved that they were actually better than the other developers in many ways. For one thing, Devil Survivor was the first game in the franchise that included the fusion search function, where rather than selecting random demons from your list and hoping to get a result you want, it just shows you what demons are available and what you'll need to fuse them. You can also hand-pick the skills you want to transfer via fusion rather than constantly re-rolling just to get the skills that you want. And then there's things that still aren't commonplace in the franchise, like the Devil Auction, where you can just buy demons instead of recruiting them, and also the ability to have more than one of the same demon. Want to beat the game with a team of nothing but pixies? Knock yourself out. Oh, and get this, you can actually save in the middle of battle. That's right, are you in the middle of an intense battle but your DS is about to die and you left your charger at home? No problem, just suspend your game and pick it up later. If you want, you can even use this as an extra save slot pretty much. Devil Survivor really does spoil its players with all these features and gameplay elements, and that's the best way to describe Devil Survivor. It's got a great SRPG flavor with all that modern MegaTen goodness on top of it, sprinkled with quality of life features. And considering that this game still holds up incredibly well despite being over a decade old, that's really saying a lot. But that's enough about the gameplay, let's move on to the presentation. Now, Devil Survivor may not be the most graphically impressive game on the DS, and is even less so with Overclocked on the 3DS. but it more than makes up for this in the other departments, like with the music, for example. As many of you know, pretty much every MegaTen game has its own unique theme for its soundtrack. For example, you have Persona 3, which was rap, Strange Journey, which was orchestra, and then Devil Survivor, which is hard rock. While Devil Survivor may not have the most variety with its soundtracks, in fact, not including the 2 new soundtracks that were added in Overclocked, there are only 26 different soundtracks in the entire game. But they're all so good and they fit with the game so well, I'm okay with that. Seriously, just listen to this battle theme and tell me you don't want to go beat the crap out of some demons. Then you have the intimidating boss music. And then there's the ambient overworld theme. And of course, the insanely epic music that plays at the very beginning of the game. And a personal favorite of mine, the calming guitar music that plays at the end of every day. They even seem to have taken inspiration from Nocturne by including a song with barely intelligible English lyrics. The soundtrack for this game was composed by the late Takami Asano, and this is the only MegaTen game he ever composed the music for. I actually did a bit of research and found out that he didn't compose music for that many video games, but he did play in a rock band called Go Daigo, and it's been going since 1975. That's pretty cool. But getting back on topic, there's also the art, which is probably the most controversial aspect of this game. The art for this game is done by Suzuhito Yasuda, who is most famous for his work on the light novels Durarara and Is It Wrong to Try to Pick Up Girls in a Dungeon, which actually explains a lot. Well, despite the ridiculousness of some of the designs, I actually do really like the artwork he did here. The characters' faces, the haircuts, their clothing, and their expressions, it's all really cool, and their portraits do a great job of conveying the characters' emotions. Even though I do completely understand why the art may not be everyone's cup of tea. Another controversial aspect of this game, more specifically with Overclocked, is the voice acting, but to be honest, I don't have a problem with this either. As someone who played the original before playing Overclocked, I don't think I could have asked for a better English cast. If you ask me, the characters' voices fit them excellently. They all do an outstanding job of representing their characters and their emotions. It's made up of many cast members that had done work on other MegaTen games before and would go on to do many fan-favorite roles, like Karen Strassman, Jameson Prince, Aaron Fitzgerald, Laura Bailey, and, well, you can't expect every voice cast to be perfect, but for the most part, the voice casting is great, even if there are some horrendous voice acting lines.
This cannot be!
But thankfully, these are few and far between. And then there's just those cool little details that we don't really talk much about, but add more charm to the game than you'd think. And in Devil Survivor, that's the UI. Devil Survivor came out in 2009, back when smartphones were new, expensive, and not owned by most people. Devil Survivor's UI is made to resemble what you'd see in an old late 2000s cell phone, complete with the choppy animations and sound effects. And I love it. Playing this game in the 2020s really is a blast from the past. But I'm getting a little carried away now. Let's move on to the story. The premise of the story is that you and your friends arrange a meetup in Tokyo where you're given encrypted Nintendo DSs, or as they're called in the game, communication players, or comps for short. Your friend cracks the code, it summons demons, you fight the demons and form the contract, making you and your friends demon tamers. The next morning you wake up and find out that everything within the Yamanote line is locked down. Demons are running amok and wreaking havoc, and you're trapped inside, beginning your 7-day struggle for survival in the lockdown against the demons. From the beginning to the end of the game, you see the situation go from, this isn't so bad, we'll just wait it out, to, oh no, we're not getting out of here, and we're probably gonna die. And man, is it brutal. Going back to my whole point about immersion, what Devil Survivor really excels in is how it's able to realistically depict a situation progressively getting worse and worse, and how it affects human behavior. Not just with the NPCs, but the same thing will happen to your friends as well. And this game doesn't try to dumb it down either. It may not be full of cursing and blood and gore like a lot of games seem to think is necessary, but this game does not shy away from making you feel uncomfortable. You will see people fight, you will see people die, and you will see just what a situation like this does to people's humanity. In fact, most of your fighting is actually not against the demons, it's mostly against other humans. Not just crooks and criminal demon tamers, you fight against commuters, demon worshippers, police, and even the military. It becomes less about trying to wait it out or find a solution, and more just them resorting to whatever may increase their chances of survival. And it gets worse the further into the game you get, especially when it becomes apparent what's going to happen at the end. Everyone in the lockdown has a different idea of what should and shouldn't be done to survive. And while you're stuck in the middle of it all, struggling to stay alive, you'll meet all kinds of people and dig up and piece together information about the lockdown, like the reason for why it happened, who is behind it pulling the strings, and how it all ties into a conflict that's been raging since biblical times that you've inadvertently dragged yourself into. You also have plenty of side stories like a gangster investigating the murder of his brother, a journalist trying to uncover a deadly government conspiracy, a single father trying to take care of his sick and weak son, a bullied high school student driven mad after his friend is threatened, and many more. You even have the characters talking about how before the lockdown they thought they had nothing, but after being trapped in the lockdown with no electricity or outside communication for a few days, began to realize just how spoiled they were. It really makes you think about how much we, as people in the modern age, over-rely on technology. There's lots of other political and social commentary brought up too, like the question of whether or not religion is ultimately a good thing, the consequences of being easily and anonymously able to spread information through the internet, and how people like to jump to conclusions and assume the worst of a situation, which in turn makes it even worse. Oh, and let's talk some more about the characters. Some of the most relatable, well-developed characters in the franchise. These characters do more than just serve as your allies. These are characters with realistic personalities and realistic backstories that you can get behind. For example, there's the dynamic between the three main characters, Yu, Atsuro, and Yuzu, where you're all childhood friends who, despite having some differences, get along really well, and throughout the lockdown, by sticking together and helping each other survive, you're all able to keep your sanity and grow closer to one another, while learning more about each other and why you think the way you do. This is also true for two more of my favorite characters, Jin and Haru, who, because they both had very troubled pasts, see each other as their true family, with Jin taking the responsibility to protect his friends and family during the lockdown. And these are just a few examples. Going over every character in the game in detail would take way too long, but this is honestly one of the few works of fiction where I can say there isn't a single character that I think is bad or poorly written. Even characters that the fandom seems to unanimously hate, I just can't help but like them. I mean, heck, even the non-playable side characters are really well developed. In fact, another one of my favorite characters is the one I mentioned earlier when I was talking about side stories, and that is Yasuyuki Honda. He's a widower struggling to take care of his son to the point where he's carrying out illegal operations for companies to make ends meet. During the lockdown, his son is having surgery, and he's becoming more and more desperate for a way out because he feels that he needs to be by his son's side for it, to the point where it's driving him insane. You know, for a game that's all about magic and demons and teenagers saving the world, this game has a lot of real Now, with all this stuff crammed into a single 20 to 30 hour game, it may seem like an incomprehensible mess of nonsense, but it's not. All of this lore and these little side stories tie into the main story in a way that makes sense, and while most of them aren't necessary, it's recommended that you do them because it helps you learn more about the world, and it really shows how messed up of a situation this game puts you in. And that's what makes this game's world so immersive. As you play this game, things may look bleak, they may look hopeless, but there's always that faint glimmer of hope that you keep trying to find, and that's your motivation to not give up. It all comes together at the end of the second to last day, where you're given the choice of who to side with. Will you side with God and become the Messiah? Will you become the Demon King and lead the war against God? Will you hijack the source of the demons and tell them to f*** off? Or will you try to bust out of the lockdown to save your own life? It's up to you to use the information you've learned throughout this game to make a decision. All the characters you've talked to, all the information you've uncovered, it is all done in preparation for this one moment at the end where you choose a path to take. And the best thing about it is that there's no objectively best ending or true ending or any of that nonsense. Every ending has its fair share of positives and negatives. Whichever one is best is purely up to the player. And let me tell you, regardless of which ending you take, this last day is one of the most intense moments in any video game. You know that the world is on the brink of destruction, and if you make one mistake, it's over. The amount of excitement you feel at the end of the game as you race against the countdown with all the friends you've made by your side while you accomplish everything you've been preparing for this entire game. The adrenaline rush that you get as you fight your way through the bosses, the amount of power you feel as you beat them. It is one of the most satisfying things ever, not just because of the gameplay, but because you're doing it for a cause. You're fighting for the world that you care about, with characters that you care about, and now it's finally come to an end. And if there's anything it leaves you feeling other than satisfaction, it's the desire to experience this game more. Before I wrap things up, I want to briefly talk about Devil Survivor 2, because I don't know if I'm ever going to get around to doing a video about it, and I'm sure some of you are wondering what I think of it. Devil Survivor 2 was a unique take on the Megami Tensei franchise. The gameplay was pretty much identical to the first game, but it takes place in a completely different timeline, and aside from a few Easter eggs here and there, it has no connection with the original. The story is that humanity is past its expiration date, so these godlike aliens called Septentrions start invading, and it's up to the main cast to use the demon summoning program to stop it. It sounds great in concept, but in execution, not so much. For one thing, Devil Survivor 2's cast is very hit or miss, and contrary to what TikTok cosplayers will tell you, they do miss. Quite a lot, actually. There are a few characters that I love, but the majority of them are either poorly written, cliched to a painful degree, or just downright awful. And while the story does bring up a lot of interesting philosophies and has some great endings, it failed to hook me the same way the first game did, which might be because the plot doesn't really take off until halfway into the game. And even when it does, I can't help but notice that it's eerily similar to another piece of Japanese media I've seen. Of course, it's not a bad game though, the gameplay and music are great, and as I just said, the story isn't very good, but it does have a self-aware B-movie style to it as well, and some pretty hilarious dialogue to go with it. Overall, Devil Survivor 2 was a decent entry in the Megami Tensei franchise, but not a worthy successor to the masterpiece that was Devil Survivor 1, if you ask me. Devil Survivor is one of those games that just gets everything right. It excels in everything it does. It has a story and world that are interesting, with characters that you care about. It has excellent music, good artwork, with gameplay that's fun, customizable, replayable, and it's all soaked in quality of life features and other things to do. It all comes together to make what is one of the most satisfying and memorable experiences in any video game ever. It's been more than 8 years since I played this game for the first time, and I still remember everything about my first playthrough. How I struggled with the Wendigo fight, how I saved life, how bad I felt when I accidentally let die, how sympathetic I was when Atsuro told me his backstory, how I dug up the government's hidden conspiracy, how I stayed up till 3 a.m. marathoning the game on the final day, and how awesome it felt when I fought the final boss with Demon of Darkness playing in the background. Every time I go back to this game, after no matter how many times I do, I just find myself getting sucked right back into it, and I can't put it down. Never before, or even after, has a game had me so invested in its world and attached to its characters. It's almost like I feel I'm there for the short time it takes me to play it, and it just leaves me wanting more. I don't know if we'll ever be getting a Devil Survivor 3, but even if we don't, I'm glad that this game exists, and I'm glad I got to be alive during a time when this game was relevant. And, you know, even if we do get a Devil Survivor 3, it's going to be hard to live up to, let alone surpass the bar set by the first game. Devil Survivor not only got me into Megami Tensei, a franchise that has so many of my other favorite games, but it helped teach me that a video game can be more than just a fun little way to waste a few hours after school or work. They can have interesting and thought-provoking stories, they can make you reconsider your own beliefs, and they can have characters that you can connect with on a personal level. And this isn't even some high-profile, big-budget cinematic kind of game. This game was on the Nintendo DS, the same portable console with a 3-inch screen that I bought for Pokemon Diamond version and Kirby Squeak Squad. When I think of this game, I think of all the great experiences I've had with this franchise, all the things I've learned from it, and how it's all because I decided to buy this game on a whim for $15 after playing Persona 3. And that is why Megami Tensei Devil Survivor is not only my favorite MegaTen game, not only my favorite DS game, but my favorite game of all time.